The wolf had not slept in 3 nights. Varric Thornfell felt it pacing beneath his skin as he climbed the north stair of Duskhold. Claws of unease, dragging along the inside of his ribs. Nothing had crossed the borders of Hollowmoor. No challenger had bared his throat. The pack was fat and quiet, under the dying autumn moon, and still, the beast in him would not lie down. It circled. It scented the cold air of the keep, as though something had been taken out of it, and only the animal noticed the hole. Something was missing, he simply could not name it. In 3 days, he would stand beneath the ceremonial arch and take Malvina Coldwin as his Luna, and the whole of the Hollowmoor would howl its blessing. The alliance was clean, noble, exactly the sort of match a throne was built on. He should have felt certainty. Instead, he felt the itch of a wound he could not find, in a place he had never been cut. He reached the door of his private chambers and stopped. He never came back at this hour. In 5 years he had never once returned before dusk. The servants cleaned the royal wing while he sat in council, and by the time he climbed these stairs, the rooms were always empty, always aired, always his. Yet tonight, his feet had carried him up early, unannounced, without a reason. He could give the guards, and his wolf had pulled him the whole way like a hound on a scent. He pushed the door open without a sound. She was on her knees at the hearth, sleeves pushed to the elbow, scrubbing ash from the stone. A slight woman, brown-haired, plain gray servant's dress gone dark at the cuffs. He had seen her 1,000 times and never once, truly. She was part of the room the way the curtains were part of the room. Fenna. He knew the name only because the steward used it. The way one knows the name of a lamp. His wolf lunged so hard against his ribs that he nearly staggered her. The force of it stole his breath, not desire. He had known desire, and this was nothing so simple. This was recognition. Deep, marrow deep. The way a half-drowned man recognizes air. His pulse slammed, his vision narrowed to a point. Every instinct he owned strained toward the kneeling maid, as though she were the hole in the world finally filled. It made no sense. None. She had not yet heard him. And then a smaller sound turned his head. By the window, half hidden in the fold of a heavy drape, a child sat cross-legged on the floor. A boy, no more than 5, dark-haired, absorbed in lining up a row of river stones from largest to smallest. A servant's child, underfoot, in the royal wing, where no child had any business being. Varric's gaze slid over him the way it slid over everything, and then snapped back, because the light had shifted, and for one heartbeat the boy lifted his face. The world tilted under Varric's boots. He was looking at himself. The same black hair that would never lie flat, the same heavy brow, the same stubborn jaw, in miniature, soft with childhood but unmistakable. Carved from the same stone that had carved every Thornfell king for 300 years. Varric's own face looked back at him from across the room, small and unguarded, and did not know it was a mirror. Then the boy noticed the stranger in the doorway, his stones scattered. His whole body went rigid with the pure animal fear of a child caught somewhere forbidden. And in that flood of fright, his eyes flared, a ring of molten silver, blooming around the dark. There and gone in a breath, an alpha's aura kindling in a body far too young and far too low-born to hold one. Varric felt it strike the air like a struck bell. His wolf answered before his mind could, surging up his throat, with a single word that was not a thought, that he could not have stopped if the kingdom had depended on it. Pup. The maid moved. She came off the floor faster than he had ever seen a servant move, crossing the room and folding the child behind her skirts in one motion, and when she lifted her face to her king, it was white to the lips. But it was not the boy's fear he saw in it. It was something older, something braced. The look of a woman who had rehearsed this moment 10,000 times in the dark and prayed it would never come. "Your Majesty," Fenna said, and her voice did not shake, and that steadiness frightened him more than any tears could have. "Forgive us, we'll go." Varric did not move from the door. For 5 years this woman had knelt at his hearth. Seb. For 5 years this child had grown, one wall away from the throne of Hollowmore, breathing the same air as the king, who now could not look away from either of them. And his wolf, silent for so long he had thought it half dead, was howling one word over and over inside his skull, and would not stop. Mine, mine, mine. He let them go. He did not know why. He let them go. Only that the maid had gathered the boy and dipped into a curtsy and slipped past him through the door, and his body, for once in its life, had obeyed no one and done nothing. He stood alone in his own chambers, long after their footsteps faded down the servants' stair, staring at the row of abandoned river stones on his floor, and could not make his heart slow. Pup. His wolf would not release the word. Pup, pup, hours. Varric pressed the heel of his hand to his sternum, as though he could push the animal back down. Servants' children were not born with the aura. It came at the first shift, at 11, 12, 13. And it came only to alpha blood, to the old lines, to sons of kings. It did not bloom in a scrubwoman's boy at 5 years old in a fold of curtain. He had seen it anyway, and the face, moon above, the face. He crossed to the bell pull and stopped with his hand around it. Who would he summon? What would he ask? Steward, bring me the maid who cleans my rooms, and her son who wears my grandfather's jaw, and explain to me why the sight of them has cracked something open behind my eyes. He would sound mad. A king, 3 days from his mating ceremony, undone by a servant and a child he had never once noticed. He let the bell pull go, but he could ask quietly. He found the steward in the lower hall and kept his voice level, bored, a king making idle account of his household. The maid Fenna, how long had she served? 5 years, Majesty, near enough to 6. Brought in by whom? The steward's brow creased. He could not rightly recall. She had simply always been there, quiet, tireless, asking nothing. And the child? Came in with Her Majesty, a babe in arms, no father named. The steward said it without weight, the way one reports weather, and yet Varric watched the man's eyes drop half a second too soon. Watched the small, careful stillness come into his shoulders, and knew, with the certainty of a predator reading a flinch, that the steward was telling the truth about the facts and lying with everything underneath them. Everyone in this keep knew something. The thought arrived cold and complete. He turned it over as he walked back through the wing, and everywhere he looked he began to see it. The way 2 laundresses stopped talking as he passed, the way the old cook would not meet his eye, the way a footman he had known for a decade suddenly found the floor fascinating. 5 years he had walked these halls as their king and thought himself the one who saw everything. Now, he wondered how much had been arranged just outside his sight, in the half-second before he ever looked. He went to Osric. The healer was ancient, half-blind, the only man in Duskhold who had tended Varric since boyhood, and the only one, perhaps, too old to fear him. Varric found him among his drying herbs, and did not bother with the pretense he had used on the steward. He described the aura. The silver ring, a child of 5, low-born, flaring like a king's sun in a moment of fright. Osric went very still over his mortar. You saw this with your own eyes, the old man said. It was not a question. When Varric said nothing, the healer set down his pestle with hands that had begun very slightly to tremble. Whose child? A maid's, Fenna. She cleans my rooms. The pestle rolled off the bench and cracked on the floor. Osric did not reach for it. For a long moment the old healer stood with his clouded eyes fixed on nothing, his mouth working as though around a word too heavy to lift. And when at last he spoke it was not an answer but a plea, low and frightened and meant, Varric realized, as much for himself as for his king. Majesty, Osric whispered, do not ask me that here. These walls have ears that answer to your mother, and to the lady you are to wed. If you value that child's life, ask me nothing more until we are somewhere the moon can hear us and no one else. Varric had gone perhaps 10 steps from the healer's door when he felt the change in the air. Malthina Coldwin came down the corridor like weather. She was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, polished, cold, made for one purpose and honed to it. Silver fair hair, a gown, the gray-green of deep water, a smile already arranged on her mouth before she was near enough to use it. In 3 days, she would be his Luna. He had chosen her himself, or believed he had. In that flat and reasonless way, he seemed to have chosen so much of his life. His wolf lifted its head and growled. Varric nearly missed a step. The beast had never done that. In all the months of the courtship it had regarded Malvina with the same mild indifference it gave the weather or the wine. Now it drew back its lip and pressed low in his chest, hackles up, watching her come with the flat attention it usually saved for a rival on his borders. Danger, it said, in the wordless way it said things. Danger, danger. And Varric, still raw from the healer's fear, did not silence it. My king. Malvina reached him and laid 2 cool fingers on his sleeve. You look troubled. The steward says you came back early and frightened half the wing. A light laugh. Whatever has ruffled you, a child, Varric said, and watched her. He had not meant to test her. But he had spent his whole life reading the twitch before the strike, and he was watching her face when he said it. And so he saw the thing she did not mean to show. Her smile did not waver. Her eyes did. Just for an instant, a flicker, quick as the boy's silver aura, there and gone. And what crossed them was not the small annoyance a lady feels at a servant's brat underfoot. It was fear, bright and bare and instantly buried. Fear, where there was no reason on earth for fear to be. A child? She repeated, her voice perfectly smooth. The keep is overrun with servants' litters. I keep telling your mother we ought to thin them before the ceremony. She tilted her head. Which child? Not, is it hurt? Not what happened. Only, which one? The same hunger. The steward had hidden, worn now behind a lady's smile. She wanted a name. And he saw her let out a breath she had been holding. Saw the fear fold itself back down beneath the polish. Saw her decide he had noticed nothing worth noticing. She patted his arm. She spoke of seating and garlands, and the elder's blessing. He answered in the right places. But something in him had gone as quiet and cold as his wolf, because he was thinking of the healer's trembling hands, and the steward's dropped eyes, and now this, thinned them before the ceremony. And he was beginning to understand that his household had been keeping a secret from him for 5 years. And that the woman he was to marry, in 3 days, was not afraid the secret would hurt the child. She was afraid it would reach him. Varric smiled and lied, and let her lead him toward the east hall. Under the smile his wolf paced its cage, and would not stop watching her, and one certainty was hardening in him like frost on glass. Whatever had been kept from him beneath his own roof, one wall from his throne, he was going to drag it into the light, and he was going to do it before those 3 days were out. Osric had asked for the moon, and the moon was where Varric found him. The old healer kept a walled physic garden below the east tower, a square of frost-silvered herbs open to the sky and nothing else. No paneled walls here. No servants' passages behind the arras. Only the cold, and the dark, and the 2 of them. Varric came alone and found Osric already waiting on a stone bench, his ruined hands folded tight in his lap to still their trembling. You take a draught each night, Osric said, before his king could speak a word. For the headaches. You have taken it for 6 years, Majesty, and never once wondered why a healthy alpha wakes with his skull splitting. He lifted his clouded eyes. Who mixes it? The still room, on my mother's order. Varric's frown deepened. Why do you ask me things you already know? Because I trained the woman who mixes it, and I know every leaf that goes into that cup, and none of them are for pain. The old man's voice dropped until the frost seemed to swallow it. Wolfsbane, drawn fine. Silver, ground to dust and steeped, and a third thing I will not name under open sky. Together, they do one work only. They keep a door in your mind shut. Every night you drink, and every night the lock is oiled again." The cold went straight through Varric's chest. "6 years ago you fell ill," Osric went on, faster now as though he had held the words too long and they were fighting to be out. "A whole season gone from you. You were carried back through the north gate barely alive and raving, and the Queen Mother sealed the healing wing and turned every one of us out but two. When you woke, you did not remember the season at all. You thought you had spent it hunting the far range. We were forbidden, on your mother's word, on pain of our families, to tell you otherwise." Varric's wolf had gone deathly still inside him. "Tell me what?" "That you did not spend that season alone," Osric's throat worked. "There was someone with you, out past the border, all those weeks you were lost to us. I never learned the whole of it. But I know this, because I was made to help do it, and the shame of it has followed me to the grave. I am nearly in." He reached out and gripped the king's wrist with sudden, desperate strength. "They did not only take the season from you, Majesty. They took a person, a living soul, cut clean out of your memory like rot out of an apple, and I helped keep you still while they did it." The garden tilted. For one instant Varric smelled rain that was not falling and heard the edge of a voice he did not know, and then it was gone, and there was only the old man's grip and the ring of the moon overhead. "Who?" Varric said. It came out barely a breath. "Who did they take?" Osric's face crumpled. "I never knew her name," he whispered, "but I know it was her. And I know she is still in this keep, because you keep drinking, Majesty, and a lock is only oiled when someone fears the door." Varric did not sleep that night, and he did not drink the draught. He poured it into the fire instead, and watched it hiss green and spit, and in the morning, his head split exactly as Osric had promised it would. A bright, grinding agony behind his eyes. He understood at last that the pain had never once been his to keep. He dressed without calling for anyone. Then he went, looking for the woman who cleaned his rooms. He found her in the linen court, folding sheets in the gray dawn light, the boy asleep on a bench, nearby beneath her shawl. She did not see him at first. He watched her hands move, quick, sure, worn thin at the knuckles, and felt the animal in him strain toward her with that same drowning need, and this time he did not fight it. He let himself look, really look, at the woman he had walked past 10,000 times without once seeing her. She was not beautiful the way Malvina was beautiful. All polish and edge, she was something quieter and far more dangerous to him. Familiar. His whole body insisted. It knew the line of her shoulder, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear without thinking. His whole mind swore it never had. Fenna. She turned, and her body dropped into the curtsy before her face could catch up. And for half a heartbeat, before the servant's mask came down, he saw what lived underneath it. It was hatred, not fear. Not the flat deference of the low for the high. Hatred old and banked and burning, the kind that takes years of quiet to make. It was aimed at him like a spear, and it was personal in a way that made no sense at all, because he had never in his life done this woman a single wrong that he could name. Then it was gone, folded away behind her lowered eyes, and she was only a maid again. "Your Majesty needs something from his rooms? I need the truth." He stepped closer. "The boy, his name." A pause. Too long. "Ansel, Majesty." "He has none named." Her voice did not waver. Her hands, he saw, had gone white around the sheet. "Look at me when you lie to me." It came out rougher than he meant. She lifted her face, and it was smooth as still water, and only the pulse hammering in her throat gave her away. "5 years you have knelt at my hearth," he said. 5 years, and I never learned the color of your eyes. Why does that shame me now? Why do I stand here feeling as though I have wronged you when I cannot name the wrong?" Something flickered across her face. Quick, involuntary, gone. "The king wrongs no one," she said. "He simply forgets they were there." The words landed strangely, far too heavy for a maid to say to a king. And she knew it the instant they left her. He saw the fear leap up in her at her own daring. But he was barely listening now, because he had stepped near enough to catch her scent. And the moment it reached him, the world buckled. It was not a smell he knew. And yet, his whole body knew it, lunged for it. And behind his eyes, the shut door shuddered on its hinges. Rain on a low roof, firelight thrown gold across a small room. A voice sang a word that might have been his name, shaped soft, shaped like it belonged to someone who had the right to say it that way. The ghost of a laugh he had never heard, and somehow could not go on living without. Pain drove through his skull like a spike, hammered to the hilt. He gripped the edge of the table to keep his feet. "What," he ground out, "were you to me?" Her mask cracked straight down the middle. For one terrible naked moment, she stared at him, and her eyes filled, and something rose in her face that was not hatred and not fear, but a grief so vast it stopped his breath. The grief of a person who has waited years to be asked exactly that question, and has finally stopped believing it would ever come. Her lips parted. He leaned in, the door in his mind grinding open, the light of the answer bleeding through the crack. "There you are." The voice cut the courtyard like a blade. Savine Thornfell swept in beneath the archway, silver-haired, straight-backed, serene, and behind her came a still-room girl, carrying a fresh cup upon a silver tray. The Queen Mother's gaze took in the whole of it in one flick. The king, the maid, the closeness, the crack running down the woman's face, and did not so much as flicker. That absence of surprise was the most frightening thing Varric had ever watched his mother do. She had expected this. She had been waiting for it. "You missed your draft, my love." Sabine's smile was warm and total. She lifted the cup from the tray with her own hand and held it out to him. "You know how you suffer without it. I heard you were unwell this morning. Pale, they said, and short with the counsel. Drink and come away, and let the poor girl get back to her work." The cup was between them. Varric looked at it, and looked at his mother's steady, fond, bottomless eyes, and for one wild instant, 6 years of habit nearly closed his hand around the stem. The pain wanted the cup, the pain begged for it. And Fenna's face closed like a door, slamming shut. The grief vanished, locked back down behind 5 years of practice, because she had seen that silver tray 1,000 times and knew to the drop what it did, and she turned back to her linen as though none of them existed, as though she had learned long ago that hope was the cruelest thing in the world. Varric took the cup. He did not drink, and over its rim he watched his mother watch him, and understood that whatever he had almost remembered, she had crossed the whole of the keep at dawn to make certain he forgot it again. He did not drink it. He held the cup all the way back through the keep, thanked his mother at her door, and the moment he was alone, he tipped it into the roots of a dead rose in the gallery urn and watched the soil drink what he would not. Then he did a thing no king of Hollowmore had done in living memory. He cleared his own counsel for the day, and he went and sat on the floor of his chambers where the boy played. Ansel did not trust him. That was plain. The child pressed himself into the far corner by the window when Varric lowered his great frame down onto the cold stone, and watched him the way a leveret watches a hound, and said nothing at all. His mother had been sent to the wash-house on some errand invented by the Queen Mother, a small, deliberate cruelty, to part the two of them, and so the boy was alone with the king he had every reason on earth to dread. Varric picked up one of the river stones still scattered from that first evening, when the world had begun to come apart. "You had these in a row that night," he said. "Biggest to smallest." Why, the boy's eyes flicked to him and away. A long silence, then, grudging, the way small children cannot help answering a question about their own games. "It's the pack." Walking to the winter den, he crept an inch out of his corner despite himself. "The big one goes first, so the little ones don't get lost in the snow." "Which is the big one?" Ansel pointed to the largest stone. "The Papa Wolf." Something turned over slowly and heavily in Varric's chest. "You have a Papa Wolf in your story." "Everybody has a papa," the boy said, with the flat certainty of the very young, "even if he's not there." He edged all the way out of the corner now, drawn by the stones in spite of himself, and knelt to set them walking across the flagstones. Mine went up the mountain before I was born. Mama sings about it. His small voice dropped into a tune, half-remembered and tuneless and unbearably sweet. He said he'd come down by the spring, but the mountain kept him, kept him, kept him. He shrugged one shoulder. It's just a song. Mama says it isn't about anybody, but she only sings it at night, and only when she thinks I'm sleeping, and after she sings it she cries, but quiet, so I won't hear. He frowned at the stones. She says she's only tired. She's tired a lot. Varrick's hands had gone still. Ansel, do you know what your papa looked like? No. The boy said it easily, without grief. You cannot miss a face you never saw. But Mama keeps a thing of his. He said it as though it were the most ordinary fact in the world, and pointed, not at his mother's bundle, not at the servant's stare, but across the room, at the king's own mantle. At a small carved wolf, no longer than a thumb, worn smooth and dark with handling, that sat among Varrick's silver cups and hunting trophies where it had sat, unremarked, for as long as he could remember. That one. She polishes it every day when she does your fire. Every single day. She thinks nobody watches, but I watch. He lowered his voice, sharing a great secret. She told me once, it's the only true thing in this whole big house. I don't know what she meant, but she cried when she said it. So I didn't ask. Varrick could not breathe. He had lived beside that carving for 6 years. He had set his cups down beside it season after season, and never thought to wonder how a rough little wooden wolf had come to sit among a king's treasures. His maid had placed it there. His maid had tended it every dawn, with her own hands, in his own rooms, one wall from his throne, keeping the one honest thing she had left in the middle of the house that had stolen everything else from her. And he had walked past it, and past her, and past the child who wore his face, morning after morning after morning, and seen none of them. The song turned and turned in his skull. He said he'd come down by the spring. The dead rose, roots, and the poured-out cup, and the grief on the mother's face when he had asked what were you to me, and the carving worn smooth by 6 years of a waiting woman's thumb, it was all one thing. He could feel the shape of it, now vast and close, a single drowned truth rising slowly through dark water toward the light. And every hour he stayed awake, and unclouded, it rose a little nearer the surface. Ansel, he said very carefully, may I hold it? The wolf? The boy considered him with those solemn, dark eyes, his own eyes, his father's eyes. 300 years of Thornfell kings looking out of a scrubwoman's son. You have to be gentle, Ansel said at last. It's old. Varrick had just risen and crossed toward the mantel, his hand lifting toward the carving, his heart slamming as though the whole locked door were about to give at a single touch, when the chamber door opened without a knock, and it was neither his mother nor the maid. It was Malvina. She was smiling, and she said, Darling, wonderful news. I've spoken with your mother, and we've found the little maid and her boy a far better place. There's a pack out past the Grey Fells, always hungry for hands. They leave at first light tomorrow. Her smile widened, sweet as sugar and twice as false, and her eyes went past him to the child on the floor, and to the small carved wolf beneath his reaching hand. Isn't that kind of us? By the day of the ceremony, my love, you shan't be troubled by either of them ever again. Varrick smiled at Malvina, and agreed that it was very kind, and said he had a kingdom's worth of work before the ceremony, and could not be disturbed that evening. He watched her go satisfied. He watched the door close. And then he stood in the center of his chambers with the boy's abandoned river stones at his feet, and the little carved wolf on his mantle, and let the smile fall off his face like a mask cut from its strings. First light. They were taking them at first light. He had one night, he did not go to the council. He sent word that the king was unwell, true enough, and he let the cup sit untouched, and his bed stay cold, and as the hours drained toward dawn, the thing behind his eyes grew stronger. It came in pieces. The way light comes through a shutter, someone is slowly prizing loose. The smell of wood smoke and wet pine, a ceiling of rough beams he had never lived beneath. A woman's hands, winding a bandage around his ribs, and his own voice, younger and unafraid, asking her name. Each fragment surfaced and burst before he could hold it, and left him shaking and no wiser and hungrier than before. He paced the length of his chambers 100 times. The carved wolf watched him from the mantel with its worn, blind face, and each time he passed it, the animal in him leaned toward it and moaned. Twice he lifted his hand toward it, and twice something stopped him. Not fear, exactly, but the sense of a man standing at the lip of a great height, knowing the next step cannot be taken back. A laugh, low and warm, cut off in his memory the instant before he could name the mouth it came from. And a word, rising and rising through the black water behind his eyes, a name with the shape of two soft beats, almost his to hold, and then gone again, every time, snatched back down into the dark by 6 years of a lock oiled cup by cup. He would stand here until the wall broke, or the sun rose, and let it grind him to powder, if it had to. By the black hour before the sun, he could not bear it any longer. He went down the servants' stair himself, a king in the passages. His own feet had never walked, and he found the narrow door the steward had named, and he did not knock. He opened it. Fenna was awake. Of course she was awake. A woman does not sleep the last night before they take her child to the far packs. She sat on the edge of a hard cot with a small bundle already tied, and Ansel slept curled behind her. And when the king filled her doorway, she came to her feet, slow and stiff, and she did not curtsy. That was the first thing. She did not curtsy. "Come to see us off?" Her voice was flat, scraped clean of the servant's care. "You could have waited for the light. We'll be gone soon enough. You'll have your quiet rooms back and your fine wedding, and you won't have to look at either of us ever again." Her jaw worked. "Though you never did learn how to look." "Tell me about the wolf," Varric said. She went still. "The carving. On my mantel. The one you tend every morning." He stepped into the small, cold room. "My son says it is the only true thing in the whole house. He says you told him that. He says you cry when you sing him the mountain song." His voice was not steady. "I have carried a wound for 6 years with no cut to show for it, Fenna. Tonight I mean to find the blade. Tell me about the wolf." And something in her, some rope held taut for 6 years, finally snapped. "You carved it," she said, and her voice cracked open and bled. "You. With your own hands and a borrowed knife, the night the moon took us, because I had nothing and you had nothing, and you said a bond deserved a keepsake, even if it was only a scrap of pine." Tears stood in her eyes and did not fall. She had long ago learned how to hold them. "You pressed it into my hand, and you closed my fingers over it, and you swore. You swore to me." What did I swear? That a wolf always finds its own. The words tore out of her. "However far they take you, however long, keep him by your fire," you said, "and I'll follow him home to you." And then they took you through the north gate, and you never came back, and I waited through the winter, and through the spring, you promised, and through the summer, and when the child came, I named him. And I waited some more, and when I could not wait any longer, I brought your son to this palace, to find his father. And his father looked straight through me at his own front gate, and asked the steward to find work for the beggar woman and her brat. "Fenna, do you know what 5 years in this house has been?" She was past stopping now. The rope had snapped, and the whole weight of it was coming down. "I made your bed. I laid your fire. I carried your bathwater up that stair while you sat below planning a wedding to a woman who helped cut me out of your skull. I stood in your doorway with your son on my hip, and heard you laugh at that woman's jokes through the wall. Every feast day, I watched them hang the banners a little brighter, and I told my boy his papa was up the mountain, because that was kinder than the truth, which was that his papa was 30 feet away and did not know his face." Her voice cracked down the middle. "And the worst of it, the very worst, is that I could not even hate you cleanly, because some fool part of me kept whispering that no man chooses this, that something must be wrong with you, and it kept me polishing that wretched carving morning after morning like a widow tending a grave that wouldn't stay filled. Tomorrow, they finally give me my freedom. They take my son to the Grey Fells, and there will be nothing left in this house to hope for. And do you know, I was almost grateful. The room reeled. Varric put his hand to the doorframe. 5 years, she said, quieter now. And quieter was worse. 5 years. I have knelt at your fire. 5 years I have kept that wolf polished. So that, if you ever, you would see it and it would call you home the way you promised it would. And every single day you set your wine beside it and never once asked yourself why a king kept a beggar's toy among his silver. A terrible, broken laugh. I told myself you were bewitched. I told myself no man could be that cruel by choosing. Tonight they take my son to the Grey Fells, and I have finally stopped believing it. So no, Majesty, I will not tell you about the wolf. Ask your mother. She was there when you forgot me. Varric's mouth had gone dry as ash. The fragments were roaring up now, a flood behind a cracking wall, and without knowing how he knew, he heard his own voice speak into the dark of that little room. A wolf always finds its own, he whispered. However far, however long, Fenna stopped breathing. He looked up at her, as ruined and astonished as she was. The vow he had never in 6 years heard spoken aloud falling from his lips, as though it had been waiting there the whole time, under the draft, under the years, under everything they had built to bury it. I'll follow him home to you, he finished. And his voice broke on the last word, and for the first time in the length of a war neither of them knew who they were looking at anymore. Behind Fenna, Ansel stirred on the cot, half-woken by the strange charged silence, and murmured, "Mama," and she went to him at once, gathering him back down into sleep with a hand that shook and did not look at the king again. But Varric saw what she could not hide from a mate whose bond was clawing back to life beneath his ribs. The leap of terror in her, the leap of that cruel and stubborn hope she had begged all night to be rid of, both at once warring in her the way they warred in him. "Don't," she whispered over the boy's dark head. "Whatever you are about to do, whatever you think you remember, I have survived you twice, once when they took you, and once every morning since, at your fire. I will not survive you a third time. So unless you are certain, Majesty, unless you are willing to burn this whole house down to the ground to make it right, walk back up that stair and leave us to our cart, and let me have my freedom at last." Varric looked at the little carved wolf on the mantle of his mind, and at his son asleep, and at the woman who had kept a vow alone in the dark for 6 years while he drank the very cup that broke it. "I am going to burn it down," he said. And he turned and went up the stair and left her there, not in surrender, but because there was one thing left in his chambers he had to hold in his own 2 hands before the sun came up. He did not stay. He could not. If he stayed, he would break in front of her, and he had no right to break in front of her. Not yet. Not until he knew the whole of what he had failed her in. So he turned from the little room, with the vow still burning on his tongue, and he went back up through the sleeping keep to his own chambers, and he crossed straight to the mantel, and he took the carved wolf down into his hands. The moment his skin closed around the worn pine, the wall came down, not in pieces, now, all of it, all at once. He remembered the border parley, 6 years gone, the false truce, the cup pressed on him by a smiling envoy, the sickness that had spread through him as he rode home, the horse throwing him somewhere past the northern marches where no one would think to look. He remembered crawling. He remembered a low roof and firelight, and a woman who did not know he was a king and did not care, who set his shattered ribs and fed him broth and shouted at him when the fever made him try to rise. Younger, fiercer, her hands raw from a hard life at the forest's edge. The only soul in the wide world who had ever looked at him and seen a man instead of a throne. He remembered falling in love with her over a whole slow season, the way snow melts, too gradual to watch. And then, all at once, a river. The evenings, she argued philosophy with him, not knowing she argued with a king, and won. The morning he first made her laugh, and felt something in his chest come loose, that had been clenched tight his whole life. The way she had never once been afraid of him, not even when his wolf slipped its leash in fever and paced her little room with its hackles up. She had simply set down a bowl of broth and told the beast to mind her floor. He remembered the night the moon rose full, and his wolf had lunged up in him and known her past all reason and rank, mate not chosen, not arranged, not a treaty in a marriage bed, his. He remembered carving the little wolf by that same firelight with a borrowed knife, clumsy and certain, and pressing it into her hand, and the vow. He remembered, meaning every word of it, with the whole of a heart that had never before had anything to give. He remembered the guards finding him, the relief on their faces. His own confusion, half-healed and blurred, promising her, a few days, only a few days, to show my mother I live, and then I will send for you, I swear it on the wolf, and kissing her, at the tree line, and riding through the north gate, into his mother's arms. And then he remembered the rest, and the remembering was worse than the sickness had ever been, his mother's face when he spoke of a woman past the marches, Malvina's gone white, then smooth. The two of them bending close over him in the healing wing while the fever still had him, murmuring that he was confused, that there had been no woman, that the far range played such tricks on a wounded mind. He remembered fighting it. He remembered the night they came for the bond itself, the sealed door, the drawn shutters, the ring of tallow candles, the old severance rite that no honest healer would speak aloud. He remembered the bitter draught they pressed on him, and the ground silver, and the third thing, the one Osric would not name under open sky, and how it had felt to have a living bond unpicked from the inside one thread at a time, each strand parting with a small bright ache, like a man being quietly unstitched from his own soul. He remembered clinging to a name through all of it, Fenna, 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 while gentle hands kept him still, while Osric wept and would not meet his eyes, while his mother said over and over in the voice she had used to soothe his childhood fevers, "There was no one, my love. There was never anyone. Sleep now." He remembered the door in his mind, swinging shut. He remembered them oiling the lock every night, after in a cup, for 6 years, and calling it medicine, and calling it love. Varric sank to his knees on the stone floor of his own chambers. The little wolf clutched to his chest and made a sound he had never made in his life. She had not been abandoned, that was the thing that gutted him. She thought she had been abandoned, had thought it every day for 6 years, had raised his son on that belief, had cried it quietly into a pillow while she sang the mountain song, and it was not true, it had never been true. He had tried to come back, he had fought his own mother's hands to keep her name. And then a cup had been lifted to his mouth, and the fight had been ground out of him one night at a time, and he had spent 6 years living in warmth and silver and peace, wedded to the very quiet that had been carved out of her suffering. He had called her the maid. He had asked the steward to find work for the beggar and her brat. He had set his wine beside it every night, the one thing in that whole house that had never lied to him and never once looked down. His sun had lit up like a king's sun in a fold of curtain, and he had thought it impossible. He knelt there a long time, he did not know how long, while the little wolf pressed its blunt shape into his palm, and the whole ruin of it moved through him and would not stop. He thought of the mountain song, sung soft into a pillow, so the boy would not hear. He thought of 5 birthdays he had spent below at a council table, signing grain writs, while 30 feet above him a woman lit a stolen candle end for his son. He thought of every dawn she had knelt at his hearth and polished a scrap of pine and prayed the man who carved it might look down, and of how, every single dawn, the man had glanced past it and turned away. The grief of it did not come as rage. It came as something heavier and quieter, the way the deepest water is the stillest, a debt so vast he could not see the far shore of it, and knew he would be paying it the rest of his life, and meant to. The moon was going gray in the window. First light. First light. They were coming for her at first light. Varric Thornfell rose from the floor of his chambers, with the carved wolf in his fist, and 6 years of stolen grief in his chest. And the thing that stood up was no longer a confused king chasing a wound he could not name. His eyes had gone, the flat, cold gold of the alpha in full, and his wolf was no longer pacing its cage. The cage was open. And, somewhere below, his mother was sleeping, the untroubled sleep of a woman who believed the lock would hold one more day. She was about to learn how wrong she was. He did not send for her. He went to her. He walked into the Queen Mother's apartments as the sky was graying, past the maids who tried to bar the door and thought better of it when they saw his face. And he stood at the foot of his mother's bed until she woke and found her son looking down at her the way a judge looks down from a high bench. Sabine Thornfell was not a stupid woman. She read it in a single glance, the gold eyes, the carved wolf in his hand, the 6 years standing open behind him, and to her credit, or her damnation, she did not scream, and she did not weep, and she did not pretend. You stopped drinking. Tell me why. His voice filled the room without rising. Look at me and tell me why. And she did. She rose and wrapped her robe about her and told him. And the worst of it was, how reasonable she made it sound, because she believed every word. The Coldwind Pack had held the eastern passes. Old Coldwind had been one hard winter from marching on the hollow moor when the marriage was struck. Malvina's hand for the passes, an alliance sealed in blood that had kept 10,000 wolves from a war they would have lost. And then the heir to the throne had staggered home from the marches, raving about a bond with a hedgewoman past the borders, a woman with no name, no pack, no worth, whose existence would have shattered the Coldwind match in an afternoon and loosed the war they had all bled to prevent. I did the arithmetic a queen must do, Sabine said, and there was no shame in it, only a terrible steadiness. 1 woman, or 10,000. 1 bond, or the whole of the hollow moor under Coldwind's spears. I have never once regretted the sum. Her chin lifted. I saved this kingdom. You may hate me. Kings have hated their mothers for less, and ruled a long time after. You did not have the right. His voice did not rise, and that was worse than if it had. There were 100 roads out of that winter that did not run through the inside of my skull. You could have told me the truth and let me choose. You chose the one road that cost you nothing and cost me everything, and you have called it arithmetic every night since, so you would not have to call it what it was. And what was it? Theft. He said it flatly. You are a thief, mother. You stole 6 years, and a wife, and a son, and you dressed the crime in a crown, and told yourself it was statecraft. Sabine's mouth thinned, but she did not look away, and he gave her that much. She did not hide from it. And, keeping her here, Varric's hand tightened on the wolf until a pine bit his palm. That was not statecraft, and we both know it. You could have sent her 100 leagues off. You kept her scrubbing my floors. You let my son grow up a wall from my throne. Why? For the first time, Sabine's gaze slid away. And when she answered, it was not with a queen's arithmetic, but with something smaller and colder, and he understood that this part had not been hers. That was Malvina, she said quietly. She said a grievance you cannot see is more dangerous than one you can. She wanted the woman where she could be watched, discredited, a known nothing under our eye, she said, rather than an unknown wound beyond our reach. If the maid ever spoke, who would believe a scrub woman against a queen? Sabine closed her eyes. I told myself it was mercy, keeping the child fed, keeping the mother alive. I told myself a great many things, Varric. At the bottom of a great many cups, I made certain you drank. The door opened behind him. He did not need to turn to know. He felt her come in. Malvina, summoned by frightened maids. Sweeping in already, speaking already, smiling. Darling, whatever is the matter at this hour? And then she saw his eyes, and she saw the wolf in his hand, and every word died in her throat at once. She knew. He watched her know. He watched 6 years of triumph curdle into terror in the space of a single breath. You wanted her watched? He turned. You wanted my son under your eye, powerless, so that if his mother ever found her voice, you could have her called mad and put out the gate. You knew. Every day you smiled at me across a table. You knew there was a woman scrubbing my hearth, who was my true bonded mate, and a boy playing in my curtains who was my blood, and you meant to ship them to the gray fells at dawn, and stand up beside me tomorrow in white. I did it for us. Malvina's composure was cracking now, fast, the way ice cracks once the first line runs. You do not remember what she was. Nothing, Varric, a wood-smoke girl, with mud to her elbows, and you, a king. It would never have lasted. I only made real what was always going to happen. I gave you the life you were born for, a throne, a proper Luna, peace. And you would have been happy. You were happy. For 6 years you were happy, until you started pouring your medicine into the fire and dug up a grief you had no more need of than a scar. Her voice climbed. I love you. I have loved you since we were children. Does that count for nothing against a woman you cannot even properly recall? I love you, Malvina said again, when he did not answer, and it was the most honest thing he had ever heard her say, and it did not move him at all, because he was not looking at her anymore. He was looking past both of them at the graying window, and at the truth standing plain in it at last. While Fenna scrubbed his floors, he had called her nothing. While she tended his fire, he had never felt the cold she carried through it. While his son slept, one wall away, he had slept the deep, dreamless sleep they poured for him, and called it peace. While she wept the mountain song into a pillow, he had lain untroubled, behind a door they oiled shut each night. While she raised his blood alone on stolen candle ends, he had signed grain writs, and laughed at this woman's jokes across a bright table. 6 years. They had not stolen a season from him. They had stolen a whole life, hers, and the boys', and his, and dressed the theft up as medicine and duty and love, and he had swallowed it every night with his own hand. He would carry that last part to his grave. That was the wound that would never fully close. Not what they had done, but that they had made him the instrument of it. A willing hand lifting the cup to his own mouth. They had not only stolen his mate, they had made him complicit in her abandonment, night after night, and called it caring for him. First light is coming, Varric said, very softly, and something in the softness made both women go still. No one leaves for the Grey Fells. No one touches that woman or that child. Not tonight, not ever. The guards on the north gate answer to me now, not to my mother's seal, and I have already sent word. His gold eyes lifted, and moved from his mother to the woman he was to have wed. You built this in the dark, both of you, in sealed rooms and still rooms and whispers behind your hands, so we will not end it in the dark. Tomorrow, when the whole of the pack stands in my courtyard for a wedding, they are going to hear every word of it from my own mouth, and then the pack itself can judge what you have done to its king and its heir. Malvina made a small, broken sound. Sabine only closed her eyes. An old queen hearing the arithmetic come due at last. The kingdom gathered for a wedding and got a reckoning. They did not know it yet. The banners hung gold from every wall of Duskhold. The ceremonial arch stood wound with the last white blooms of autumn, and the whole kingdom pressed into the great courtyard shoulder to shoulder. Nobles and warriors and pack elders, and the low folk crowded at the back, all of them come to see their king take his Luna beneath the noon sun. Malvina climbed the platform in silver, radiant, composed. She had spent the night deciding that his silence since dawn meant surrender, That he would do at the last what men like him always did, and choose the throne, and choose peace. Sabine stood at the platform's edge, with a face like carved marble. Varric came up the steps in black, the carved wolf in his fist, and he did not take Malvina's hand. The head elder had already lifted his arms to begin the blessing. Varric did not let him. He stepped past the old wolf to the very lip of the platform, where the whole sea of upturned faces could see him, and he let the silence stretch until even the musicians faltered and stopped. Before the blessing, he said, and his voice rolled out across the courtyard on a thread of alpha power that stilled 10,000 wolves at once. The Hollow Moor will hear a truth its king was made to forget, he told them. All of it in the plain, flat voice of a man reading a ledger of his own robbery, a border parley 6 years past, and the tainted cup, and the whole season lost beyond the northern marches. The woman who had found him barely alive and nameless, and had never once cared that he was a king, the bond that took under a full moon, with no treaty and no crown behind it, only 2 people, and a vow, and a scrap of carved pine. The son she had carried, and borne, and named alone. The sealed room, the ground silver, the wolfsbane, the old severance rite, worked on their king, by his own mother and his promised bride, to keep a Coldwin alliance whole. The 6 years of nightly draughts poured for him by loving hands, the maid at his hearth, the boy in his curtains, and the cart that had stood ready at the north gate that very dawn, to carry the both of them to the Grey Fells before the wedding could be troubled by their faces. The courtyard came apart. Gasps became a rising murmur. The murmur became a roar, elders turning to elders, warriors to their mates, the low folk at the back craning and shoving to hear, and through it, Malvina's voice rose shrill and desperate above the noise. "Lies!" she cried, rounding on the crowd, playing the last card she had. "Where is your proof, my king? A scrub woman's fairy tale. Show them one shred of proof that this servant's brat carries a single drop of royal," the child cried out. Ansel had been near the front, half hidden in Fenna's skirts, where Varric had ordered them kept safe and close, and the roar of the crowd and the venom in Malvina's voice had frightened him past bearing, and the fear kindled the thing in him that no low-born child should carry. His small eyes flared. A ring of molten silver spread around the dark, bright, and unmistakable, and Alpha's aura blazing up out of a 5-year-old in front of 10,000 witnesses who all knew, every one of them, exactly what it meant, and exactly whose blood alone could light it. The courtyard fell into a silence, so total the banners could be heard snapping overhead. There was no faking that no scrubwoman's tale could counterfeit the royal aura in a child's frightened eyes. Every elder in the Hollowmoor had waited a lifetime to see that silver ring in a Thornfell air, and here it burned in the sun of the maid, and the truth of it landed on the whole pack at once, and could never again be unlanded. An old pack elder near the platform sank slowly to one knee in the dust, and then another beside him, and then, like a wind moving through standing grain, the whole vast courtyard began to bend, not to Varric, but to the frightened child with the silver in his eyes, the blood of their kings made plain before them all. Varric came down off the platform. He crossed the courtyard through a sea of parting, staring wolves, and he knelt in the dust in front of his son, king though he was, and he was weeping and did not care who saw. "It's all right," he said. "It's all right. I have you. No one is ever going to take you anywhere again." And he gathered the trembling boy into his arms, and the silver in Ansel's eyes gentled and faded against his father's chest, and the Hollowmoor watched its king hold his blood in the dirt, and understood that everything he had said was true. Then Varric rose, with his son in his arms, and turned back to the platform, and his voice when it came was quiet, and carried to the last row all the same. "Malvina Coldwin, there is no bond between us, and there never was. You saw to that yourself 6 years ago. In a sealed room, I repudiate the match before the pack and the moon. You are stripped of every title you were ever to hold. And of the Coldwind's seat at this court you will be gone, from my territory by nightfall, under guard, and if you are ever found within my borders again, your own pack will not save you." She dropped where she stood, a silver heap on the platform, sobbing into her hands, and he had no pity left to spend on her. His gaze moved to his mother, standing gray and straight at the platform's edge. "You saved a kingdom, you say, and you told yourself the sum was clean. You will keep your life and your name, because you are my mother, and I am not yet the monster this house tried to make me. But you will hold no office and no counsel in the Hollow Moor again. You will not sleep another night beneath this roof. You will live out your years where you can do no more arithmetic with other people's hearts. Go." And Queen Sabine Thornfell looked for a long moment at the grandson. She had kept a wall from her own son's throne, at the silver still fading from his eyes. And then she bowed her silver head and went, and the crowd let her pass in a silence heavier than any curse. The pack would have kept him. There were 100 things a king must do. The hour a wedding becomes a reckoning, elders to calm, a Coldwind envoy to answer, an order to sign that turned a cart bound for the Grey Fells into nothing but an empty cart in a yard. He did none of them yet. He set his son upon his hip, and he held out his other hand to the woman standing white and stunned at the courtyard's edge. And when she would not take it, he did not command her. He simply waited, hand open, in front of the whole of the Hollow Moor, for as long as it took. He walked them out of the noise, the 3 of them, to the quiet of the old physic garden, where the frost still silvered the herbs and no walls had ears. And there, at last, out of sight of the pack, the king of the Hollow Moor turned to his mate and had no speech left in him at all. "I remembered," he said. It was all he had. "Fenna, I remembered everything." She stood very still, the way a person stands who has been struck too many times to trust an open hand. "You said that with your eyes, in the courtyard," her voice shook. "I have imagined you, remembering 10,000 times. In none of them were you weeping in the dirt with our son." A tear escaped at last, the first he had ever seen her let fall. "I stopped letting myself imagine it years ago. It hurt less to believe. You were only cruel, I know." He did not reach for her. He had lost the right to reach first, and he knew it. "You waited, through the winter and the spring. I promised, and every season after you carried him alone. You buried a husband who was never dead, only stolen. And you tended his marker every dawn on my own mantle, so that if he ever crawled out of the grave they made him, he would know the way home." His voice failed. "You kept the vow for both of us, all this time. Alone, I have no apology big enough. I am not going to insult you with a small one. Don't." Her voice was fierce and wet. "Don't you dare kneel to me again the way you knelt to him out there. I have spent 6 years hating a man who could kneel, and I do not know what to do with the one who can." She pressed the heel of her hand hard against her eyes. "You want to know the cruelest part? It is not the waiting. It is not even the forgetting. It is that a part of me is glad, glad. Moon held me, and I hate that gladness, because it means all my hating was just love with nowhere to go. And I would rather have hated you cleanly for the rest of my life than find out I never stopped." "Then hate me," he said, "for as long as you need. I will still be here at the end of it. I spent 6 years unable to find you standing right in front of me. I have learned how to wait too, Fenna. I learned it from you." For a long moment, she only looked at him. And then Ansel, on his father's hip, reached out with one small hand and touched the tear on the great king's face, curious and grave, and said, "Are you my Papa Wolf?" And something in Fenna broke. That hatred had held shut for 6 years, and she stepped forward, and Varric's free arm closed around her and their son between them. And the severed bond, 6 years, cut and buried and grieved, came roaring back up through the both of them all at once. It was not gentle. A true bond does not knit quietly. It slammed into place like a bone reset, like a drowned lung dragged back to air, so that they both gasped with it, and clung to each other in the frost. And for the first time in 6 years, each of them could feel the other on the far end of the thread. The fear, the grief, the disbelief, and under it all, the thing that had refused to die no matter how deep they buried it. They did not mend that morning. Some woundings are too large to close in a garden, and Varric knew it, and did not pretend otherwise. He did not move Fenna into the royal wing that week, nor the next. When he offered, she said she was not ready to sleep in the house that had swallowed her whole, and he did not argue, and had a small warm cottage made ready for her and Ansel within the walls instead, near enough to reach, far enough to breathe. He came to them each evening as a man, not a king, and knocked, and waited to be let in, and some evenings he was, and some he was not, and he took both the same. In the weeks that came, he learned the shape of everything he had lost. The first word, it had been moon. The first steps taken in a servant's corridor, with no father to catch him. 5 birthdays marked with a stolen candle end and a song. He learned that Ansel was afraid of deep water and unafraid of the dark, that he hoarded interesting stones, that he had invented the whole Winterden pack himself to explain where a papa goes. Varric wept for every year he had missed, quietly, when the boy was not looking, and he did not once ask Fenna to hurry her forgiveness. He set Osric free of 6 years of shame and gave the old healer the honor of tending the child's first true shift whenever it should come. He sent riders to the Coldwind passes with terms of his own, and found, to the surprise of everyone but himself, that a pack will follow a king who knelt in the dirt for his son more gladly than one who never had to. And slowly, the way hard ground thaws, not in a day but grain by grain, until it can hold roots again, Fenna began to give her forgiveness back to him. Not because the debt was paid, it would never be wholly paid, and they both knew it, but because the thread between them, once it came back, would not be denied, and because a wolf, whatever is done to it, whatever is taken, always in the end finds its own. One evening, near the first snow, they sat on the garden bench, the 3 of them, and Ansel lined his river stones across the frozen path, biggest to smallest, the papa wolf at the front so the little ones would not be lost. And Varric watched his son walk the pack home to the winter den, and felt his mate's hand come to rest in his without his asking for it, and closed the carved wolf into his other palm, and understood that it had done its work at last. It had waited on a cold mantle through 6 years of a house's lies, tended by the only hands that still believed in it, and it had called him home, however far, however long, exactly as he had once sworn beneath the moon that it would. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and for staying with Varric, Fenna, and little Ansel all the way to the end of their journey. Stories like this one live and breathe because of you, the people who listen all the way to the last word. If this tale found a place in your heart tonight, please leave a like, subscribe, and ring the bell so the next story finds its way to you too. And before you go, I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Leave your town, your country, or just your quiet corner of the sky in the comments below. I read every single one, and it always amazes me how far this little story family reaches. Until we meet again, may the moon light your path, and may it always guide you home, however far and however long.